Is natural really always best? Is natural always better than synthetic? The most toxic substance known to man, and it is completely natural. Welcome back to the Crossover Connections with Jack Wang podcast. My name is Jack. I'm a scientist, college professor, and microbiologist. I want to segue into a segment called The Connect, where we revisit viewer comments on previous episodes to explore the connectivity between people's thoughts and how our episodes are faring. And this is a series of comments throughout a number of videos that we're going to try and summarize thematically. Thank you for engaging with my content. I really need as many comments and as much feedback as I can get. That will allow me to make a more informative and more entertaining podcast. So this comes courtesy of a user, Amala Aduala, who says, nothing on earth is better than natural. Nothing. Some people replied to it to say, if only everyone understood this, but people are just too stupid. In this case, I believe they're referencing people are too stupid to realize natural is always best. This is a very common sentiment in the general public as well. But if we look at poisons, what are the 5 most poisonous things on the planet, and are they natural or are they synthetic? This is an article from The Conversation, which talks about the world's 5 deadliest poisons, and we do have to qualify how we measure deadliness in poisons. And there is this concept in pharmacology and microbiology referred to as LD50 or lethal dose 50. This is a bit of a morbid term, but it's referring to a group of test subjects, whether they be test animals or test humans. How much of an agent do you need to give to kill? Again, I apologize, this is pretty fatalistic and morbid. Kill 50% of the subjects in that test group. If the poison is to be really, really potent and very poisonous, the LD50 to be very low, because that means you need a tiny amount of the dosage to kill quite a large number of subjects and people. The most deadly poisons have the lowest lethal dose 50. Sodium cyanide, hopefully people recognize cyanide as a very deadly poison, has a toxicity of 6 milligrams per kilogram, whereas another poison, tetrodotoxin, has 300 micrograms per kilogram. So micrograms are much smaller, 1,000 times smaller than milligrams. So you need far less of tetrodotoxin to cause very deadly outcomes than something like cyanide. So funnily enough, cyanide is actually not the most poisonous thing in the world by a long shot. The number 5 most deadly poison is ricin. A very old school example of this is the Bulgarian dissident Georgy Markov, who was exiled in London, and he was very famously on Waterloo Bridge when he felt a little ping on the back of his leg, and he saw a person wielding an umbrella, a very famous umbrella assassin, and there was a platinum iridium alloy in Markov's thigh, and it had been drilled out to ingest a tiny little bit of ricin in that pellet, presumably fired from that umbrella gun. It's very James Bond-esque. Lodged itself in Georgy Markov, and he was taken to hospital and died 3 days later. Ricin more recently is made famous by the ricin cigarette in Breaking Bad. All you Breaking Bad fans should know what I'm talking about. Ricin has an LD50 of 1 to 20 milligrams per kilogram. And ricin is natural. It's obtained from beans of the castor oil plant, and it's cultivated to extract the oil. It is completely natural, yet it is very deadly. The number 4 most deadly poison is a nerve agent called VX, and it is the only synthetic compound out of this top 5 of most deadly poisons in the world. VX interferes with the transmission of nerve messages between cells, and this pretty much interferes with that acetylcholine transmission between nerves. These are nerve agents that prevent the nerve synapses from communicating to each other, and muscle contractions go out of control. You're not able to use the muscles in your lungs, around the lungs, to help you breathe, and you die from asphyxiation. VX was very well known in the movie The Rock, Sean Connery, Nicolas Cage, an absolute classic. Its LD50 is 3 micrograms per kilogram. Really, really tiny. Number 3 most deadly poison in the world is batrachotoxin, something that is completely natural. Again, it comes from the skins of tiny frogs. These venom-tipped blowpipes of the South American Indians, the classic stereotypical trope, which I don't believe is necessarily true in this day. They would collect the frogs and sweat out their poison from their skin over a fire before distilling it onto their darts. And the LD50 of this particular batrachotoxin, again, completely natural from a frog, is 2 micrograms per kilogram. It is super, super deadly. A tiny little bit of it will kill you. And the way it works is that it interferes with sodium ion channels, again, in muscles and nerves, and it's jamming them so that they can't close. And this constant migration of ions leads to a lot of different effects and a lot of different misfiring and muscle contractions. But really, heart failure is the most obvious and immediate consequence that will kill you. The number 2 most deadly poison in the world, mycotoxin, which again is completely natural, found in the environment naturally. This is associated with algal blooms in the sea, and mycotoxin is the most lethal of these substances found in these environments. It has an LD50, an order of magnitude less than the previous toxin, batrachotoxin. It is a cardiotoxin. It increases the flow of calcium ions through the cardiac muscle membrane, and it causes heart failure as well. What is number one on the list of most deadly poisons in the world? It is something you have very much heard of, botulinum toxin, or it's affectionately referred to as Botox. It is very, very lethal. It is the most toxic substance known to man, and it is, again, completely natural. Its LD50 is 1 nanogram. So a nanogram is 1,000 times smaller than a microgram, and a microgram is 1,000 times smaller than a milligram, which is 1,000 times smaller than a gram. So a nanogram per kilogram is by far the most poisonous thing we can think of, and we found to date, and again, it's completely natural, found an anaerobic bacteria that exists in the world, exists in the environment. This is completely natural. Botulinum toxin is not just Botox. Botox is a different version of it. Cosmetic Botox has a very, very small amount of this toxin, and it will interfere with the muscle contractions, and it will kind of smooth out the muscle, because if the muscle can't contract, then the wrinkles around the skin that the muscle is attached to won't be able to furrow and kind of crinkle, and therefore you won't get those folds in your skin, and you'll give the illusion of looking a little bit younger for a little bit longer. But if you just elevate it beyond just a little bit more to that very toxic level of nanograms per kilogram, tiny LD50, Botox will kill you. It's the most deadly substance known to man, and it is, again, completely natural. So the top 5 most deadly poisons that we know of, 4 of them are completely natural. Nature is home to some of the most deadly and most poisonous things we've ever found. The answer isn't synthetic is always better. That's not the answer either. It's gray and case by case, which is a very unexciting interpretation of a rather clickbaity title. In fact, this might be one of the most clickbaity videos I've ever made on the channel, and that's saying something. This type of debate really boils down to it depends, and it's not very exciting. It's a little bit fence-sitting. Synthetic chemicals are not really more toxic by default than natural chemicals. Of course, there are some synthetically derived chemicals that are very toxic. There is very little correlation between toxicity and being found in nature or being synthetically made. Misconception 2, organically grown food is better for you because it's all natural. We may be able to make the argument that kind of organic farming is more humane to the animals and it is more sustainable, but if it is not as efficient and you need to use more water to keep the crops alive because the fertilizer you're using is natural and the yield on that fertilizer isn't as good, then that's not a great argument for the environment overall, because you need to use more resources to compensate for the fact that you're going all natural or organic. But really, organic farming purely from a yield level, purely from environmental impact level, synthetic fertilizers, synthetic pesticides can be just as effective, if not more effective, than the organic pesticides and the organic processes that are working. The last article we'll talk about today is one from the BBC, which dives into the commercial leanings that companies will leverage to win this debate in your pocketbook and to get you to pay for products or pay more for products because they are natural rather than synthetic. First of all, it may not be that natural at all. They could be using synthetic versions of those chemicals and claiming that it's natural and charging a premium, thinking that it will attract a more interested and more exclusive clientele. But we can be fooled on this, right? Will natural things automatically be better for the environment? Indian sandalwood, it is a fragrance used in beauty products. Each sandalwood tree takes 30 years to reach full maturity before its essential oil can be harvested, and overharvesting puts this plant at risk of extinction. And what they've done is they've recreated this lab, this biotech company Emeris, using a more affordable and bioidentical sandalwood molecule from sugarcane using fermentation technology. So they're very smartly leveraged biotechnology to reproduce this molecule in a more sustainable way without having to grow these trees and cut them down in an unsustainable way. So this is an example where synthetics actually is more efficient and better than the natural alternative. I believe that we as the consumer need to be a bit more savvy and not think natural is the buzzword that would mean everything is high quality. We need to be looking and reading a little bit more into exactly which categories of goods. Maybe a synthetic version of it has its benefits, and I hope the companies are smart enough to incorporate that into their marketing as well. Hopefully we'll get there one day. I don't think we're there yet. I'm Jack Wayne. Thank you for listening and watching. Hope to connect with you again next time around.